welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Making Monsters. We're winding down the draft series now at this point, getting ready for draft day. That is not far away, but a ton of prospects we've been able to cover, and now we're going to talk some Georgia guys. So we're joined by Mike Griffith. He covers Georgia Bulldogs for Dawg Nation. Mike, we've chatted before. I appreciate you coming on again. I know every year we're going to be talking about Bulldogs probably, so this is part of the story now.
Yep.
Let's start, though. I think the big one, I don't think that the Bears go this position group high, but I do feel like he is the most talked about or highest talked about Bulldog right now, and that's safety Malachi Starks. I love Starks. I think early on in this season, pretty quickly, and at week 1 or 2, I was already like, man, this kid's really good. If the Bears ended up needing a safety, this is someone to keep an eye out for this season. So let's talk about him a little bit. Track star in high school, that's his main thing. He's super fast. That's something that you see immediately in his game. But the cool thing about him is sometimes that athletic fast doesn't always transfer to football. And for him, Mike, it seems like it has.
Yeah, you don't really think about Malachi as a track guy when you watch him play football. He's got really good instincts. He played quarterback in high school as well as safety and as a cornerback and as a DB that can play what we call the star, or I guess kind of that nickel position. So a really versatile athletic guy. He's good, sound, open field tackler. He's got really good nose for the ball, good instincts, a good team leader, real upbeat kind of guy, very popular with teammates, seems to get the most from the guys around him. Real high football IQ. He was able to play as a true freshman. And he's known for his ability to high point the ball. He's made some really acrobatic interceptions over the course of his career, and a guy that should easily translate to the NFL.
Yeah, and that's what most people say when you talk about him. There's a few safeties I really like in this class, Malachi being one of those. But when you talk about the coverage side of things for safeties, the other important part is the run defender side. And that, to me, is something that you do see and you do talk about in Malachi Stark's game still. So tell a little bit about that and how that kind of meshed into what Georgia was able to do defensively this year.
Well, the last season, they were asking him to do a lot of different things and play 3 different positions in the secondary because of that versatility that we talked about. The ability to cover a tight end as well as a speed receiver, catch it back out of the backfield because he has decent size for a safety to go along with that speed. He does a really nice job in matchups. I guess of all probably maybe the biggest compliment that a lot of people pay Malachi was he probably did the best job of covering Brock Bowers in those scrimmages and in those practices. And as people have already seen, Brock Bowers a pretty uncoverable guy in the NFL. But Malachi was the guy that was up to the challenge. At times, Kirby Smart even gave Brock some trouble because Malachi, as a true freshman, was able to cover him and match up with him effectively. So I think that speaks really well, that you can cover a guy that's pretty much come in and dominated the NFL. And again, he was able to do it at the collegiate level, help Georgia win some championships and start right away. So when you're able to start as a true freshman, work your way into a leadership position, be versatile enough to play multiple positions, cover multiple guys, I think that's what adds a lot of value to him for these NFL teams.
Yeah, and that's what it's interesting because that's a lot of the conversation we've had is having those guys that are able to cover the tight ends. And some of the safeties that I've talked about in this draft so far, maybe their size doesn't give them that ability as much. And so someone like this, that's definitely a positive in the NFC. When you're in the NFC North, there's a lot of weapons that you're going to be covering. And so that's something that you're obviously kind of paying attention to. I want to head over to Jalon Walker. That's a big one. I think there's people mocking him at 5 to the Jags, and there's people mocking him at 10 to the Bears. It's kind of in this range where you're not quite sure where he's going to go. I think the interesting part is where he fits in an NFL defense to me, because obviously listed as a linebacker, outside linebacker, kind of a pass rusher type of guy, that off the ball linebacker, which the Bears drafted a Roquan Smith several years ago in that area that you're also, I'm sure, pretty familiar with. But tell us a little bit about Jalon Walker, where his role on that Georgia defense and where you see it kind of translating the best to the next level.
Well, another real versatile guy, kind of a Swiss Army knife. I mean, we've seen him in a speed rush end position. We've seen him hold the edge. He's big enough to do that. He can play between the tackles, also really good in coverage, a coach's son. So you're talking about another really high IQ football player and a team leader, one of only 2 guys voted a team captain last year. So, he's a guy that can play anywhere. He's a guy that kind of keeps the spirits up on the field. Another incredibly popular guy in the locker room with a lot of charisma. I think those things translate at the next level, probably now more than ever. So I think Jalon Walker's kind of one of those can't miss guys. And you mentioned it a second ago, Taylor. Where will they ask him to play? Where do they need him? And that's why he has great value as a top 10 pick, because he can play a lot of different positions, and he's proven he can play them really well.
Yeah, in 2023, he kind of had a little bit of a more reserve role, Mike, and I think that's partly because all of the talent that comes through Georgia, and this is a testament to me when you talk about Georgia players or any of the players that kind of stick through the school and maybe have limited roles in the beginning and kind of have to wait until their final year to really show out. And I feel like Jalon Walker is one of those examples, but I also think you have to give him a lot of credit because you don't see a lot of guys stick through multiple years not being that main starter in college football now with NIL and portal and all of that going on.
Yeah, Georgia's a little different in that way. You go back to Trayvon Walker was a number 1 pick and wasn't even all SEC. I mean, they're very their roles are very defined. They play a lot of guys on defense. Jalon was out there playing. He may not have been the starter, but he was getting snaps and playing in different circumstances and situations. They've got a lot of talent. They like to keep their guys healthy and fresh. So you got to be careful when you evaluate Georgia players against other players. Their stats may not look the same. Different games, he had different opportunities. I guess Texas last year, he had 3 sacks. That was his game. Mykel Williams was coming off the edge doing some chasing, and Walker was taking Ewers down in the open field. So the role is really, I would say, you have to really evaluate the role they're asked to play. The fact that Jalon was able to rise up and have a more prominent final season at Georgia says a lot for him and his ability, because, again, this is a defense that's very assignment sound. They ask their guys to build a wall up front. The guy's not running your way, you can't make a tackle. Doesn't mean you didn't do your job. Just means you got chased somewhere else. But Jalon was a guy that stood out for his versatility, for his leadership, athleticism, size, speed. Just really looks like the complete package.
Where do you see, because I know you mentioned the coverage ability, and that's something we're seeing more and more of these super athletic linebackers just because of them having to be able to drop back into coverage and doing a lot of things. And when you watch tape on him, when you read about Jalon Walker, they talk a lot about him being able to match up well in zone coverage situations. So do you think that will transfer pretty quickly to the next level too?
Yeah, he's a true hybrid. I think an NFL team will move him around as well. And again, that's a weapon for the defensive coordinator, depending on the matchup, depending on who they're playing and feature playered, formations, game plans. That's why he has that first round draft stock. You don't see a lot of guys that can play multiple positions that are, in the top 10. And the fact that he does it with that size and athleticism. I mean, sometimes you see some of the more productive guys might be a little bit smaller, might be the last guy jumping on the pile. And that's not the case with this guy. Wherever he lines up, he competes. I didn't really ever see him taken out of the game by any opposing team. I thought Georgia used him really wisely, moved him around, and he was able to really showcase his skills and build really high draft stock.
We had the conversation because obviously I cover the Jaguars too, and we had the conversation a lot with Trayvon Walker when he got here of where is he play best. I think we're still kind of having that conversation with Trayvon because he can do a little bit of everything. He's a really good run defender. A lot of people kept saying, get his hand in the dirt. Yeah, we think he can play best when his hand's in the dirt. Is there a maybe for you a point where you think Jalon Walker could do something to kind of be compared to the Trayvon Walker in that area where you can move him around to that effect on an NFL defense?
Maybe he's a little bit lighter. I don't know that he has Trayvon's size. He's a little bit shorter and a little bit lighter. I see maybe more as an outside backer. But again, third down situations, they'll put a smaller guy up at the line of scrimmage if they feel like they can beat a tackle, or as you mentioned, they'll drop him into zone coverage depending on the down and distance. So, it's hard to say when you've got a guy that has shown you he can do everything. It's hard to say what he does best. And some of that has to do with the talent too. Yeah. How good is the outside linebacker there? How good is the defensive end or the rush end or the inside backer? So the beauty is going to be in the eye of the beholder when it comes to Jalon Walker and what the team's needs are.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating because I know, like I said, I've seen a lot of people start to link him with here in Jacksonville, and it'd be a Trayvon Walker and a Jalon Walker working together. But they're, definitely two forces. If it ends up being in Chicago, I'm not totally sure just because of the linebacker situation there. But that brings me to the edge position, which is an important position in Chicago. They have Montez Sweat on one side. They went and got Dio Ojigbo this last season, in free agency. But I still think it's up in the air of the future of that edge across from Montez Sweat right now in Chicago. And so that's where Mykel Williams comes in, that true edge guy. And we've talked a lot about that the patience and kind of building up and getting your chance at Georgia. And sometimes you have to wait a little bit to really get your moment. But I feel like this last year we saw it from him. But talk a little bit about him and his place in this defense this last year, because I know Georgia's defense is something that year after year we're seeing these guys very highly drafted. A Jalon Carter that the Bears did not take a few years ago, and some people are not too happy about that. But tell us a little bit about his role in Georgia.
Yeah, maybe not quite as light on his feet as Sweat, who's actually a tight end, had an opportunity to cover Montez there up there at Michigan State. He's a tremendous athlete. But, Mykel actually drew a lot of comparisons to Trayvon Walker early in his career. That was the measuring stick for him throughout his entire career at Georgia. He had some injuries that slowed him in a couple of seasons, including this year. Had an ankle early on that he played through, was probably maybe 70-75%. That probably limited his work. But you go back and turn the tape on in the games where he was healthy, particularly the game at Texas, and he absolutely caved the pocket and created havoc. Jalen Walker cleaned up with the sacks, but Mykel was chasing him out of there. Mykel's known for his hand fighting. He's really hard to get to. He's really hard to block. He's very strong in the upper body, holds the edge extremely well. He did a couple of different things, but I think his best spot would be as a defensive end or as a rush end, depending on how he develops his pass rush skills. I think the ceiling is higher than what he's shown. I think this is a guy that is going to be a better NFL player than college player, and that's not to say he didn't have a great college career. He did, but I think he's got tremendous upside. He's got a high motor. He's a very competitive guy. He's a winner. He plays through a lot of bumps and bruises. I think when they ring the bell, he'll be there to answer it.
I'm curious because there's not many negatives you see out of him. The main ones that you do see is more of their flashes of a lot of dominance. There's flashes where you're like, this is a really dominant player. And then there was kind of these like spurts of where is he kind of moments. Do you think some of that or a lot of that led into because of the injuries?
I think a lot of it was teams double teaming him. I mean,
Okay.
You had to have a plan for this guy. And, if you don't have a plan for Mykel Williams, he's going to wreak havoc in your backfield. And teams knew that. Every game plan, they're going to circle a couple numbers of guys that they're going to make sure don't affect the quarterback or influence the play. And a lot of times he was getting double teamed, mostly throughout his entire career. I mean, so this is a guy who's used to a lot of attention from the offensive coordinator, used to plays running away from him, used to double teams. And then again, you mentioned him playing through some injuries in the past year. But again, these NFL scouts and NFL coaches, they're able to diagnose pretty quickly how effective a guy can be when he's healthy, and they're able to evaluate a guy based on a game plan. So I've seen some recent mock drafts where he slips a little bit lower in the first round. I think it's going to be hard pressed for teams to pass on another Georgia defensive lineman, after the whole Jalon Carter debacle. I mean, he was probably the most dominant defensive lineman in college football since Ndamukong Suh, but he had some off-field issues, and I think some teams were a little afraid of the press, and they're probably paying the price for that right now with players they drafted that were less capable than Jalon Carter, who I dare say may be the best defensive lineman in the NFL right now.
Yeah, and that's a conversation Bears fans are going to continue to have because obviously they let Philly jump ahead of them to take Jalon Carter.
They're not the only ones. Ones. Believe me, there's people in Atlanta right now. They're never going to forgive the Falcons for that.
Oh yeah, you got to keep them at home, close to home. I am not I would love to have Jalon Carter. I think he's a game changer, but I do think what the Bears had to do that season, they went and got Darnell Wright, who's their future right tackle now. And then with that also, they got a Javon Dexter, who's kind of proved to be a really good interior guy. But that's sometimes you take these risks, and Philly's been one of those teams who are not afraid to maybe take some of the off the field questions and say, okay, we can mold these guys into someone that you trust and people want on the field and in the locker room. And that's something that you saw this last year. It will be interesting because I think that when you talk about the trenches, the Bears have had a lot of issues in the trenches in the last 4 or 5 years, and it's going to be something that's highly addressed. They feel like they've addressed the offensive line to a good extent, but I still did want to talk a little bit about Tate Ratledge because I love mullets. It's like a kind of a joke, but not a joke. It's my thing here. And so every time I would see Tate on the sideline, I'm like, he has such great hair. I need him in Chicago. But I've seen a lot. I've seen some back and forth, some kind of like opposite spectrum takes on Tate and how quickly he will be able to be a starting guard in the NFL. What are your thoughts on that? How quickly do you think he could go out there and start?
Well, I'll throw you. There's another one. Him and Dylan Fairchild are both pretty comparable. One has a mullet, one doesn't. One had a podcast, one doesn't. So I'll give you a little sneak peek there with Dylan Fairchild as another guy. They're both offensive guards, very different personalities. Tate is very charismatic, as you mentioned, with the mullet and the podcast, and quite a personality, team leader. a pretty jovial fellow. But on the field, he's reputed to be, the most physical guy on the offensive line. So he's a masher, very good in run blocking. Now, he did have tightrope surgery on his ankle last year. He came back from that pretty fast. So he's a fast healer. He really wasn't 100%, I don't think, at the end of the year. I think he'll be much more effective in the NFL than he was towards the end of his last year. He did, as I mentioned, that tightrope ankle surgery was a factor, I felt like, in the second half of his senior year. But certainly he has the look of a prototypical offensive guard in the NFL. And then, just throwing Fairchild in there for you as a bonus.
Yeah.
That's a former, state championship high school wrestler, tremendous leverage, real lunch pail guy, can get kind of nasty in there, kind of ornery. Both of those guards were very effective. Who you like better? I mean, what they sit down and interview for, whatever psychological test they give, kind of feel like it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Don't think you can go wrong with Fairchild or Ratledge. Is the kind of guy that's going to get to that second contract in the NFL.
So for people that may have some questions about, because I think the Georgia offense was expected to be this offense that was going to be able to run the ball really well. And maybe some people are a little disappointed in the way that that run game went this last season. What would you contribute that to the most?
Well, I'd say don't read too much into it. I'd say look at the opposition that they played and look at the down and distance and the scores. I mean, they had a slow starting offense at times that had more to do with passes being dropped than it did an inability to block on the offensive line. It had, down and distance is controlled by first and second down. And, when you have receivers dropping passes, as Georgia did, led the nation in drops, it puts you in a lot more of those 2nd and 10 situations where the run game isn't called upon. You don't get the defense in the run pass conflict that you need 2nd and 5, 3rd and 3, where it sets up an effective run game. Then you also have to look at the slow starts by Georgia. So a lot of times you're playing from behind. And when you're playing from behind, obviously your run pass ratio is going to be affected by that. Finally, Georgia's running backs room was pretty thin. They had 2 injured running backs at one point. They only had 1 scholarship back that was healthy, and another one was a walk-on. So when your backfield is thin like that, you're probably not going to rely on the run game as much. The numbers can be skewed. A lot of those numbers are extended handoffs on the quick passes. You put those, they kind of look at those as runs, even though they're technically not in the statistics. So that's why I say I wouldn't read too much into it. I thought ETN was really good, but that's a guy that missed 5 games. Yeah. So, when your marquee back misses 5 games, you got 2 other guys that were scholarship backs that were considered to be the 2 and 3 back. They're injured all year. You're relying mostly on a true freshman back who had some fumbling issues and a 190-pound walk-on. It kind of limits your personnel back there. So, and then as far as the offensive line, they were less than perfect, but they had some injuries at some key spots. Their left tackle was injured most of the year, led them to play a freshman. So that led to some sacks, again, down and distance situation. And the lack of continuity, I think, a key stat a lot of people don't realize is that at one point, every one of the Georgia starting offensive linemen missed at least a week of work. So they didn't have the typical continuity that would you have on the offensive line. You put all those factors together and you come up with Georgia ranking low in the run game uncharacteristically. But I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think you got to evaluate these guys individually on what they can do. You take a look at what some of these guys were able to do in the NFL draft process, how athletic they proved to be. You put the tape onto their junior year when there was a little bit more continuity, a healthier backfield, and I think NFL teams are going to see what they want to see with these guys.
Mike, we're very familiar with the continuity side of it. I think the last 2 seasons, the Bears offensive line have had like 14 or 15 different combinations of offensive linemen because of injuries or because of players not working out, whatever it may be. So we know how that goes, and we know how quickly Caleb Williams just got sacked almost 70 times this last season. So we know how much that can affect it. A couple guys I want to touch on.
And Taylor, don't forget that. Before that, it was Justin Fields, right? I mean, it's a guy that had a tendency to hold the ball. And, we saw at Georgia that he wasn't capable of running the pro-style offense as a true freshman. That's why he transferred to Ohio State into a little bit easier read offense. So I think in that situation, I think some of that probably went on the quarterback and his inability to function in an NFL pro-style offense, maybe holding the ball a little bit longer and some of the decision-making. We'll see how Justin's career pans out. He's a great guy and an incredible talent. Yeah. But when you look at the system he played at in college, I'd say it didn't prepare him well for the NFL.
Yeah, I agree. And we had that conversation a lot when I think it was like his average time to throw was like 3.27 seconds or something like that. And he was still getting sacked a lot. So that was an issue. We had the same conversation with Caleb Williams. That's why I was hesitant this last year when we were going into the draft. But even though I knew it was happening, I knew we were drafting Caleb Williams. I was like,
He's a rookie. Georgia tried to get him. Georgia tried to get him to transfer after they won a national title.
Oh, really? I didn't know.
That's why Stetson Bennett wasn't happy in that morning interview. He
Oh,
knew that they were going after Caleb Williams, but Caleb took the bigger bag out at USC. It worked out well for him. I think he's a good quarterback. I think he'll pan out if the Bears can protect him and get him some weapons.
Yeah, and that's what I think and that's this conversation of this year. They went and they added several interior pieces. That's where a lot of the issues were last year. And so 3 new interior, a new center, and 2 new guards this last year that they got. They got Drew Dahlman from the Falcons, who is now going to take over as that center position, which keeps me away. I still want to mention Jared Wilson because I personally really like Jared Wilson. He's been somebody I've talked a lot about for the Jaguars because I do not like the interior offensive line for the Jags, and I'm a big fan of Jared Wilson. So talk a little bit about Jared Wilson and his, because you talk about that interior and kind of the protection there too. And so share a little bit about him though.
Yeah, probably the most athletic center that I've seen in some time. And I think that bodes well in the NFL. This is another guy with a high upside. He'll be the second, if not first, center off the board. It's just how much value do you put in a center? I mean, it's just a guy you're going to use a late second round pick. Do you wait till the third? I'm not sure about the depth of centers in the NFL and how deep you can really go to get a starter, 2, 3, maybe. But the fact that his athleticism, his ability to move, his quickness, I think he was very consistent with his snaps. You wonder a little bit about his size, not a lot. I think he's big enough. I think he's plenty capable. I think a team shopping for a center that they want to come in and start immediately will certainly look at Jared Wilson.
And and that's what, before the free agency came and before the Bears made all of the moves on the interior, Jared Wilson was on my list of one of these guys that I really wanted to look out for. Changes a little bit now. You give Drew Dahlman a contract you're probably not going to go after a center right now. But I did want to talk before I let you go a little bit about Trevor Etienne. We touched on him a tad, but I would be absolutely shocked if the Bears don't take a running back at some point in this draft. They have DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson right now. DeAndre Swift is just one of those guys he's that outside perimeter type of runner. He's not going to go up the middle, find gaps. He doesn't have the best vision. There's some things that you don't love about DeAndre Swift. And then there's some things where the next thing you know, he takes off for a 40-yard run if he sees any green. So it's just it's so unpredictable. And some of this was the offensive line too. You meant if the line's not there, it's a little hard to run the ball too. But I would put money that they would take it back at some point. I don't know where, I don't know when, but the people are most familiar with, obviously, Travis Etienne. Trevor Etienne, a different type of back. A lot of people say maybe not that every down back at the next level either, but how would you explain his type of running back, the type of running back that this Etienne is?
Yeah, I'd back up a little bit on Swift. The thing I like about DeAndre is his cutback ability and his home run speed. I mean, you give this guy an alley, he can take it to the house. But you mentioned the lack of consistency and the lack of a role. Very good at catching the ball. I think he's been very underutilized in that role. He's a tough guy. He's well built. I wouldn't give up on DeAndre Swift quite yet. I know his NFL age is kind of getting up there a little bit, but he's a very prideful guy. And when he's tasked in a leadership role, I saw him perform extremely well here. He's the best back that I've seen at Georgia over the last 8 years, probably going back to the Chubb days. So I wouldn't quite cash it in on Swift yet. He is a winner. He likes to win. You get those wins piling up, I think you're going to see a lot more of DeAndre. As far as Etienne, this is another guy that I really fell in love with. He came in as a transfer from Florida. You wonder how that would work. Immediately liked immediately in a leadership role. I mean, probably had too fast of a car in the offseason, got a little hot water for that, but he comes back and Kirby says, look, this guy's a leader. There's no questions about his character. I think he learned an extremely valuable lesson from that. I don't think there's going to be any character issues whatsoever. The guy showed up in the biggest moments. He scored 5 touchdowns in 2 games against Texas, absolutely destroyed Longhorns. When they needed him most, Etienne was on his game. He's dynamic. He's got great vision. He's got great burst. Like DeAndre, he's able to cut back effectively. What Trevor Etienne does extremely well, I'll use a baseball analogy. I don't know if people remember Greg Maddux, but his ability to locate the ball was one thing. Yeah, but the other thing Maddux did well was change speeds. Yep. And Etienne's got this unique ability to change speeds, measure things out, and that makes him very deceptive and hard to catch. He's able to set up his blocks really well. He's got deceptive power. He's able to run through a lot of tackles you wouldn't think he could run through, like DeAndre. When these guys are in that 200, 205, 210 range, you don't really want to make a living giving it to them 12 or 15 times up the middle any more than you would James Cook in Buffalo. Yeah. But on occasion, they can do that for you. They can keep the defense honest with their vision and running ability. Etienne can get the corner This is another guy who catches the ball surprisingly well downfield. He's not very big, and a lot of time those smaller backs, you wonder how they'll do downfield catching the ball over the shoulder. Etienne does that remarkably well. I thought he was very underutilized in that role. I mentioned it earlier. He had some injuries, and Georgia had to rely on him a little bit more of a back than maybe the pass catching back. They also use a lot of tight ends, so that has a little bit to do with some of the scheming going on. But I see Etienne as a guy that comes in and contributes immediately as a third down back. Not sure if he'll get big enough. I'm not sure if you really want to feed him the ball 15 to 20 times, but you put a guy in there like that on third down that can, run the sprint draw, get open, beat somebody in the flats one-on-one, get the edge. I think he's the consummate pro. He's got an older brother he looks up to. He tries to emulate. And when you've got that sort of leadership ahead of you, much like, again, James Cook, with his older brother, Dalvin Cook, I think we have something similar here. He's going to come in understanding the game. He's going to come in understanding the expectations. I think he's going to be an immediate contributor. If it wasn't such a deep draft for backs, this is a guy I could see going in the second round, as is probably drops to the third or fourth, just because there's so many backs in this draft.
Yeah, there's a lot of good ones. Let me ask you, Mike, what did Kirby do to get him to leave Florida to come to Georgia?
He didn't do anything. Etienne's mother wanted him at Georgia because he wanted to win a championship. Florida program was on the down. Billy brought a guy with him from another school that he was playing ahead of Trevor that wasn't as good as Trevor. And I think Trevor saw an opportunity to step up and win a championship and play in a little bit different system against better competition, get a little better prepared for the NFL.
Was it Montrell? Is that who he brought with him?
Yeah, Montrell Johnson.
Yeah.
Who's a pretty good back, by the way. But Etienne, again, and I go back to Swift, when you've got a home run hitter at running back, I mean, look, there's a lot of guys that are going to be able to break off the 20, 25, 30. But when you got guys like Swift and Etienne that can take it the distance on any time, I mean, that adds an explosive element to your offense, something Chicago is desperately in need of. I like the home run hitting back. I like these guys that can take it the distance, all the better when they're a consummate pro like Swift, like Etienne. I mean, you're speaking the right language for what Chicago needs to get their run game in order.
Yeah, especially with Ben Johnson coming now, you see what he did with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs and that running back room and how important it was to kind of everything they did. And granted, you have very different quarterbacks than a Caleb Williams and Jared Goff. So he's still going to have to probably maneuver some things and change it a little bit compared to Detroit. But we're hoping that run game gets going, and we hope this line gets fixed. But Mike,
let's give Caleb a little time. Like I said, some people don't like the way he painted his fingernails, all that. But look, this guy is an incredible talent, and he was a rookie last year. Give him time. I think that Caleb Williams could be the future for Chicago. Again, if they're beefing up the offensive line like you're telling me that they are, it sounds like you've got the beginning of a pretty exciting offense.
Yeah, look, I'm very pro Caleb. It took me a little bit. I had to see some things, but as the season went on and I started seeing him kind of a lot of the issues that people said he was going to have started towards it later in the season. We're starting to get, you could tell things were slowing down. He was figuring stuff out. I mean, I mentioned he was sacked almost 70 times. And yes, some of that was on Caleb Williams, but he still was one of these quarterbacks where in the fourth quarter, a switch would turn on. And then next thing you know, he's bringing the Bears right back into every single game that they had. And that was without not being able to run the ball. That was with getting hit. That was with a lot of issues going on. And he also had 3 offensive coordinators in one season. So I'm like, pump the brakes a little bit. So I'm with you, Mike. Give them time. I think we give up on some of these guys a little too soon. But I appreciate your time. This is really good stuff. I know a lot of these guys a lot of people have been looking out for some of these Georgia guys, and I appreciate it. I know you're traveling this week, so safe travels, and I'll chat with you soon.
All right. Look forward to it.